Woodstock is a Johnny-come-lately character. Doesn't really arrive in the whole world of Charles Schulz's Peanuts until the 60s. And it begins with a flight of birds, almost by chance, arriving in the world of Snoopy in the doghouse. They alight on his chest, build a nest. He's annoyed. What are these creatures? Where have they come from?
And he's slowly extracted as sort of the one that Snoopy pals around with. But for 3 years, he's never referred to as Woodstock. He's just sort of that crazy little bird.
Woodstock begins as a pest. He's very pesky. It's the Nemesis character. And the Nemesis is a classic character out of the myths that will bug us, will bother us if there's any moment of challenging the status quo. That's exactly what Snoopy's always trying to do. As a baseball player, football player, hockey player, novelist, a garçon at a French cafe in the middle of World War I.
The other great thing about Woodstock is that he provides the comedic foil for Snoopy. They are the stock comedic duo archetype that you see in Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, that you see in Laurel and Hardy. More often than not, Snoopy will look to the camera, give these sidelong glances that kind of breaks the fourth wall. He's doing exactly what Oliver Hardy did.
Snoopy was the strip's Walter Mitty character, the dog who isn't really a dog, who has this fantastic fantasy life that never intersected with the lives that the children were leading.
The kids live in their own real world, and Snoopy lives in his own abstract world.
As the relationship between Snoopy and Woodstock began to evolve, Woodstock suddenly fulfilled an extremely important function.
Snoopy can interact with Woodstock on a level that is more abstract than the level that Snoopy interacts with the kids.
With Woodstock, Schulz did an extremely brilliant thing in giving Snoopy an animal sidekick with whom he could suddenly share all these crazy adventures.
At the core of all mythologies is the notion of the hero's journey. If it's too easy, it's not an adventure. It's someone else's story. You're following in your father's footsteps, or you're following in the footsteps of the culture. Hence, the importance of the counterculture. In a sense, the hero's journey is the counter journey. And the minute you take that counter journey on, the real hero journey, the search for the self, you face resistance. In the world of Peanuts, every time Snoopy sits down to type his novel, there's little Woodstock, chirp, 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 chirp. In other words, who are you to think you are a novelist? Who are you to think you can go off and fight the Red Baron? We all have that voice. Charles Schulz put a face to it.
It's like a kid playing with his younger brother. They always have these antagonisms or teasing. They can end up teasing each other, and I think that's the measure of friends. You know someone loves you if they tease you. Well, Snoopy was very self-centered in the comic strip and almost thought he was superior to the kids, and he always falls back on that, of course. But I think maybe that's why Woodstock was necessary, because Snoopy had to have someone who meant something to him.
There's a very telling phrase in an early Peanut strip that security is knowing you're not alone. But there's something very poignant in Snoopy where he's alone. Until Woodstock arrives.
Not until the mid-60s did the birds start taking on a more important role in the strip, probably most visibly during the political campaign season in 1964.
The birds would march along with signs with question marks and other things that were commentaries on what the characters were saying.
Which would allow Snoopy to make some comment about something. They were clever.
Another way that the character of Woodstock was able to broaden the comic strip, and Sparky was able to bring in things into the comic strip because of Woodstock, what is the whole birds in the nest and birds getting kicked out of the nest. And typically on Mother's Day, Woodstock had a sign saying, Mom, Mom. When he wrote those, I always felt as though it had a reflection back on him as a very young 19-year-old having his mother die. It was a very traumatic time in his life, so I think that Woodstock looking for his mom and Snoopy saying, "No, I don't think you're ever going to find your mom again," has a very poignant message from Sparky.
Charles Schulz always said he drew the comic strip for adults. And where adults could look at Woodstock and at one level with a sarcasm or apparent sarcasm, kids could look at him at another level because he's just funny to watch and flit around and crash into things. Charles Schulz was very eclectic in his reading, in his appreciation of music. He was very aware of everything that was going on in the country and the world. And I think the Woodstock Festival struck a chord for him, not to make a pun.
He would never mention in the comic strip that a festival was going on because that's reality and his comic strip is abstract. But to pull out something that was very current and everyone was talking about and pull it into the comic strip would be amusing to him. And somehow, can you imagine the bird having any other name? I mean, it's just so funny because Woodstock is perfect.
Sparky chose a small, diminutive, peace-loving, fun little bird, and he names him Woodstock, is commentary of what he, saw as what was, the change in the mood in the country.
Woodstock speaks in these little animal track-like letters that are very reminiscent of hieroglyphics.
We merely got a series of hash marks, which allows us the freedom to imagine what Woodstock is saying, and suddenly we're probably concocting punchlines or responses that are far funnier than anything that Schulz might have nailed down.
Nobody understands what all these little annoying chirps mean except Snoopy. And there's a wonderful message there that nobody understands me except my best friend.
When we saw Woodstock in the comic strip, we started to get very excited about what we could do animation-wise, because the only action figure we had was Snoopy, and now all of a sudden we could not only add the bird, but we had a friend for Snoopy to interact with on the television shows.
It seemed natural after Melendez embraced the challenge of voicing Snoopy by making all these strange little wails and beeps and whistles. That the same approach would be used with Woodstock.
He just would talk a lot of gibberish and then speed it up 10 times. So when Woodstock came along, he said, well, let's do Woodstock the same way, maybe at a higher pitch. Woodstock actually was featured in one of our television shows. She's a Good Skate, Charlie Brown, where she was to skate Peppermint Patty to the beautiful Mia Bambino Caro. And we found a fellow named Jason Serenas, who was considered one of the outstanding whistlers in the world, not just the United States. And we got in touch with Jason. He came out, and as Woodstock whistled this beautiful, beautiful song, and that was Woodstock's starring moment in Peanuts history.
The cartoons with Snoopy and Woodstock truly reach a universal audience.
They're they're buddies. They're drinking buddies. On New Year's Eve, they get drunk on root beer. There's definitely an affection between the two.
In the museum, we don't concentrate on product because our goal is to show the art of Schultz, the art of cartooning, and not the products which are byproducts of that art. But it is amazing how people would enjoy looking at and say, oh, I remember having that.
Woodstock is a natural, as a cute, stuffed, small thing with not quite eyes. They tend to be pieces of black felt. So any self-respecting Peanuts fan who's likely to buy a plush Snoopy is also likely to buy a plush Woodstock to keep it company.
It doesn't feel like Peanuts without Woodstock. There were, as I said, over 1,000 strips with Woodstock, and that's and he's one of those indelible characters that brings just a great air of levity and sensitivity and humor to the strip.